I just want to take a moment to address the problem with absolute pacifism. And just to be clear, it'll help you to know that the word pacifism, it refers to those who are opposed to violence of war as a means of settling disputes. And absolute pacifism is the idea that it's always wrong to engage in the violence of war. And there are many in the church who are quick to insist that, well, the Lord Jesus has called Christians to be absolute pacifists. For example, Jesus called us to love our enemies and to do good to those who persecute us, and this is true. Not only that, but he also encouraged those who are struck on the right cheek to then turn to that person the other cheek so that cheek might also be struck. And for some, Christians have concluded from these verses that violence must always be wrong, that war is never the right answer to conflict. We find this same sentiment in Edwin Starr's song, War, which was the number one hit on the Billboard Hot 100 chart back in 1970. Ever since then, this song has actually become the most popular protest song ever recorded. It's a song that protests war. And while I have no doubt that we all prefer peaceful conditions, as we long for a utopian world that's free from war, we must realize that Edwin Starr's popular protest song was based upon the fallacy of a hasty generalization. To make my case, I want to consider the hook line of this song, which includes this following statement: war, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. Say it again. That's how the song reads. And in other words, Edwin Starr would have us to believe that every war is nothing more than an unjustified endeavor. And listen, I'm going to say that not all wars are just. And I don't even believe that all American wars have been just. And so I'm certainly not up here to say that, war is always the answer. But at the same time, it's important to understand that sometimes war is the answer. Listen, when it comes to the convictions of those who insist that war is always wrong, well, I can't help but to wonder how they might feel about the soldiers and the sailors and the Marines who have stepped up to fight the good fight of faith against the evil regimes of murderous men throughout the ages. And one example of this, it's found in the Union soldiers who stepped up to fight the Civil War in order to free the chattel slaves who had been purchased like so much property. We're talking about the Christian abolitionists who took up arms against Southern slave owners as they sought to free the slaves who were here in the South. And as we consider how they fought this good fight, I want to consider the reason for why God gave us civil government. And we find this here in Romans 13. If you would look with me there, beginning at verse 1. Here Paul writes, "Let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For notice, he is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil." Here in these verses, we find Paul, he's helping his audience to understand God's design for civil government. And according to him, the Lord has given us earthly rulers in order to punish those who do evil. Paul also referred to the governing authorities as God's ministers who bear the sword and for a righteous reason. According to Thayer's Greek lexicon, the Greek word rendered sword, it's being used metaphorically in reference to the weapons of war. So we're not talking about just a sword, specifically. We're not saying that, our government should just use swords and nothing else. No, this is a word that was metaphorically used in reference to weapons of war. And what this means then is that there are times when the Lord will use civil government to engage in war against evil tyrants. Now, with this definition in mind, verse 4 could be rendered in this way. He is God's minister to you for good, but if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the weapons of war in vain. For he is God's minister and avenger to, notice, execute wrath on him who practices evil. In other words, the Lord has established civil government in order to punish evildoers. And this most certainly includes any enemy of our public, both domestic as well as foreign. Now, with that being the case, there should be no doubt that there will be times when our government will call upon its citizens to step up and become soldiers who are willing to wage war against the unrighteous rulers of this world. This was precisely the situation that took place back in April of 1868. After soldiers from the southern slave states attacked Fort Sumter. In response to this attack, President Abraham Lincoln issued a declaration regarding this insurrection, and it was at that point in time when he called state militias to stop this rebellion. This rebellion which was rising up in the South and coming to attack the northern states who were opposed to slavery. Abraham Lincoln called for this to be stopped by our soldiers. And it's sad that more than 700,000 soldiers on both sides of this battle lost their lives during this civil war. This, of course, includes the death of more than 360,000 Union soldiers who responded to the rebellion from the South as they fought for the freedom of those who were still slaves here in the South. And when the dust settled and all was said and done, Major General John A. Logan, he created Memorial Day. It was called Decoration Day at that point in time, but it's become known as Memorial Day, and he created this day in honor of those Union soldiers who died to free the slaves. It was actually May 5th, 1868. That's when Major General Logan honored the incredible sacrifice made by our Union soldiers by declaring, "We are organized comrades, as our regulations tell us, for the purpose, among other things, of preserving and strengthening those kind and fraternal feelings which have bound together the soldiers, sailors, and Marines who united to suppress the late rebellion. What can aid more to assure this result than by cherishing tenderly the memory of our heroic dead, who made their breasts a barricade between our country and its foes. Their soldier lives were the reveille of freedom, to a race in chains, and their deaths the tattoo of rebellious tyranny in arms. We should guard their graves with sacred vigilance." Here in this official statement, which set the stage for our nation's Memorial Day, we find General John A. Logan encouraging every American to cherish the memory of our nation's heroes, and so we should. We should cherish the memory of those whose lives were given as they fought for the freedom of those who were bound by the chains of slavery.